Now having this dice image here is nice, but we of course also want to have a button below that which can be pressed to roll the dice. And therefore we should of course add such a button. To do that, it's no longer enough to just have a single child in this center widget, but instead we need multiple widgets here. Now center only has this child argument though. I mean, it has other arguments as well, but those don't take any widgets at all. So it only takes one single widget. So what can we do now if we actually want to provide multiple widgets as child widgets here? Well, we need another widget in between, the column widget, which is another key widget that you will be using a lot when working with Flutter. The column widget exists to allow you to render multiple widgets, multiple children above each other. There also is a row widget which would do the same but next to each other, horizontally. Here I want to have widgets above each other vertically, and therefore column is the right choice. Now the children argument which can be set here then takes a list, so we need opening and closing square brackets, and it takes a list of widgets. So therefore here we can now take our image and move that into that list here, and then below that image we can display our button. Now of course buttons are a very common type of widget, and indeed Flutter supports 3 different main buttons. It has the elevated button here for displaying a button that has a background color and a slight shadow. It has the outlined button for displaying a button that has no background color but a border. And it has the text button for displaying a button that is only some pressable text. And that's the kind of button I want to display here, though of course you can play around with that and also give other buttons a try. Now when I use auto-completion here, so when I hit tab after selecting text button, I automatically get 2 named arguments added here, child and onPressed. Now child is the simpler one. Child simply wants another widget which is wrapped inside of that button. And typically that's a text widget which holds the text that should be shown on the button. Because of course this text button should show some text, otherwise you wouldn't see anything. So here this could for example be roll dice. Now I get some blue squiggly lines here because here we can add const to allow for some optional caching. But what is this onPressed argument all about now? Well, onPressed actually wants a function or null as a value. And that is something new. Up to this point, we worked with a lot of different values, with text, with numbers, but also of course with many objects and widgets, but we never used functions as values. But you can do that in Dart. Functions in Dart are also just objects. So if you define a function, you can pass a function as a value to arguments that want a function. And here for onPressed you have 2 main options. Option 1 is that you define the function just in place. This is done like this, by adding opening and closing parentheses and then opening and closing curly braces. This is a so-called anonymous function. It doesn't have a name, like click handler or anything like that, and it doesn't want a name. Instead, this function is defined here in this place where a function is needed, so that it's provided as a value to onPressed. This function is then executed, called internally by text button when it registers a click on the button. So this function is only used here, can't be used anywhere else, and that's why it doesn't have a name. But between those curly braces, you can define any code you want that should be executed when this function is called. So when this button is pressed. That's option 1. Option 2 is that you define a method, for example here, after all our constructors and these variables. And that could be a method called rollDice, as you always did by providing a name and then also a return value, which in this case should be void because onPressed wants a function that returns nothing. So therefore here you should have void, then your function name, and then here whatever code you want to execute. And now you can use that function name and use that as an argument value here. So you don't execute the function here, you don't add parentheses, you just use the function name to basically pass a pointer to that function as a value to onPressed. With that, onPressed knows where to find this function, and internally, TextButton will execute that function here when the button is pressed. Now, I personally typically prefer this approach of having a separate function that's then passed as a pointer, so to say, by using the function name, but you could also use this anonymous function instead. But here I'll go for the separate function. And now here inside of roll dice, we can do whatever we want to do when this button is pressed. If we save everything and reload, we now see this button here. It looks a bit strange, it's at the top and the button styling isn't final, but as you can see, it can be clicked. Now it's time to fix the styling and then do something when the button is clicked.